So Richard, could you share a little bit about your perspective on land acknowledgement?
Okay, I'm going to take a little different approach. I thought of this over the last couple of days, and as we speak, I mentioned to you Mark Charles is doing something on similar. I said the Lake Superior coffee cup, but what I'm going to do, I call it a sense of place. Every day should be an Indigenous Day, not just this duality between colonists and between Indigenous. And then I also shared with before we started that Native people, Indigenous people have a sense of place. Now, I'm from Lake Superior along the shores of the North, Ojibwe, Chippewa, or whatever term you want to use. And the context is I come out of that sense of place, but I also look at the world in a cosmology, in a universal setting. And the reason why that's important is I shared before we started to record that an Indigenous person has the responsibility to themselves, and we call it personal sovereignty, to accept their tribal journey, which is similar to what Bishop Mark MacDonald would call out of Canada. He's the Archbishop First Nations. What they'd call this is your tribal experience. That's similar to Old Testament. And if there's parallels to that, then you have an opportunity to at least understand that. And then the other one is, as a Christian, since I am one myself, but I also respect the creation and the dynamics of my generations that have brought me here today. I tend to be a hopeful person. I tend to be a positive person. I don't want, when I was a elder scholar in residence, when I was teaching Indian studies, I can't believe this, almost 35 years ago, 40 years ago, I don't want the native student, the Indigenous student, the specific tribe, the 474 tribes, the almost 6 million people across the country. I don't want the native person to be caught between their own individual growth and the collective experience of that specific tribe. Because if that becomes the problem, then you develop what I call a schizophrenic, a duality that doesn't serve any purpose. It's kind of like an engineer. I'm using this as an example. I was a truck driver once and I was hauling gravel. So I went too fast unloading the gravel. It was the old days when you had to pull it down. The truck went up in the air and I stopped. So then I got out of the truck and I said to these gentlemen, what do I do now? The person said to me, shovel the gravel off. The truck went down. The reason why that's important is Native people, Indigenous people, tribal people have to find a way to define their own Indigenous context. If they don't do that, every day they need to acknowledge that. It's almost like a personal prayer life. If you don't have that personal prayer life, then you're going to get stuck up there, like the truck when I was doing it. Because you dealing with people, like someone says to me, well, you don't look Indian. I said, okay, what's the next question? What tribe are you? Ojibwe. Do you know your language? I says, yes, I'm speaking English. Do you know what that means? I said, yes, my family chose to speak English, but they spoke Ojibwe. But I don't want to get trapped by the constructs of language or ceremony. What I like to get trapped by is potential, liberation, exploration, and the development of Indigenous people to benefit from the experiences that they are in their journey. That's not to say my own tribe that I'm from, there was the Sandy Lake tragedy where people went to get annuities in Minnesota. I'm from northern Wisconsin, and I currently live in Green Bay, but there were people came back and a lot of people froze to death, and it's like are comparable to Trail of Tears. But some of us didn't go. We didn't go to get annuities. Now that's the culture that I come out of. And someone says, well, what clan are you? I says, well, I'm part of a tribal community. I use a word called cultural bath, where you understand who you are. But the reason why that's important is my ancestors did not go to get annuities. I mean, I'm just using this as examples of the culture now. What does it have to do with generational processes? Uh, I take great joy in seeing myself talking to you because we're two Indigenous people trying to understand. And the reason why I'm using the truck analogy is because from public domain, you may still be an engineering student, you may not be an engineering student. You could be chemical, civil, mechanical, electrical, the whole context. But how we acknowledge experience is how we define our sense of place. We carry our Indigenous experience with us, no different than you carry the Christianity with you, no different than you carry that. But if we don't understand that, the acknowledgement then falls flat. We just look at it as a ceremony. We look at it as a language, not we don't experience it. And for better or worse, I put it in this context. I vote in tribal elections, I vote in state elections, and I vote in federal elections. But there's one aspect that the Native world we never talk about, and that's and where you are in New Mexico, the cosmology of the universe, how creation is about, and how we are part of that. I often laugh when someone, well, your tribe weren't there because of the Canadian, it's that ice shield, according to geology. So then my little statement is, we were there watching the ice recede. Because I'm from a hunting, fishing, and gathering society. Reason why I say that is when you harvest wild rice, you have to use cedar. And someone says to me, well, why do you use cedar? Well, cedar is a natural absorbent of water. And it's something that if you use pine, you'll burn your hands. I mean, it's not, so there's a natural element. So I said, I wonder how my tribe did that. And someone said, well, cedar's close to the water. Maybe the canoe bumped this, who knows? But the key is, if you don't take great understanding of your own experience, that's not to say there hasn't been difficulties, but it's understanding the hope and the experience. Because if we get trapped, and that's the colonists, the oppression, someone said, well, who discovered you? I said, well, I hope my parents. I mean, the context, you can get trapped in that. And I reason why I took the liberty of being the elder, doing the prayer, that would we call in the Episcopal Church the cosmic prayer. But if we don't do that now, I don't have a sense of place in the Southwest, but some of my good friends in New Mexico who talk about the dew and the corn. The area where I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the Oneidas talk about corn, beans, and squash. But for me, it's wild rice. But what does it have to do with acknowledgement? It has to do with, it's a consensus where tribal students or Native students, Indigenous students should figure out and study their own experience and include that in Old Testament and New Testament. If they don't include it, then I feel like this is humorous. What I said, you know, Vine Deloria, I'm 76 years old. Vine Deloria is the God is red experience. You know, I mean, it's using that as a metaphor. I may be excited about this, but it's the context of how we express ourselves in that tribe and that tri system. In the Episcopal tradition that I'm part of, we talk about scripture, reason, and tradition. In the Native experience, we talk about, maybe we say scripture, the holistic context of Native religions, Christianity. I mean, there's a way to incorporate that. A tradition is we honor, we understand. And reason, there is an indigenous region, but there's also the fact that we live in 2021. But the difficulty I'm having sometimes is when we dissect that, when we don't integrate that in our holistic point of view. And that's where I'm hoping. And next time I see you, you'll say, these are the 7 books by Deloria. I don't know. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. Because when I used to teach as an elder scholar in residence, I would say, are you a first generation college student? Have you ever had a Native class? And usually I never put anybody, you know, if you don't have it, you don't have it. So then we find ways both native and non-native, to understand that. Now, I've been blessed to growing up in a native community. I've been blessed to know who my family is, and I've been blessed that my daughter is a professor at Evergreen State College. My granddaughter is now in her first year at Dartmouth. How do you say it? Dartmouth? I mean, it took a couple hundred years. But now they have 700 graduates from that school. So they're building up an alumni. I went to a private college, and for the first 2 years, I was the only native student. But that's not to say things have changed, and they're changing in a positive way. But if we dissect and forget something, we're not integrated. That's where the being concise, and the difficulty in a capsule view is I can't put all this in the, what's the word you guys use? Algorithms? I mean, I can't put it in that context. Maybe what I could ask you is, since we're having this limited time, has any of this made any impact? That's the question.
Yeah, I think that it's really helpful in reminding me of land acknowledgement not just being something that we do and like observing the history of where we're at, but like understanding that we have a relationship to that, and that we bring our own stuff into the land, and that like we're not this third person observer, like this omnipotent observer, but we're also a part of this whole, like it's a relationship thing.
Yeah, maybe what I'm trying to say, it's the standard individual and collective. Like we as Christians talk about the individual Christian, but you don't function unless there's community.
Yeah.
And in my world, it's the tribalism where I'm not asking you to know everything. I'm saying to understand where other tribal students, both non-tribal and tribal, can understand this, because the traditional knowledge and the aspect of our history has to be understood. But what I chuckle about is on the other network, if you want to call it that, of Zoom or whatever you want to call it, Mark Charles is dissecting, he can talk to me anytime, is dissecting the proclamation of Indigenous by Biden and Columbus. Well, that's okay, but what I want to do is live a daily life of being respectful of my Indigenous culture, be respectful of my orientation as a Christian, but be respectful of how I relate in 2021 in society. And to me, unless a Native student has that, and I have a legal context to my enrollment, but let's not forget there are Native students that are not from federally recognized tribes. There's over 50 or 60 tribal people. In the case of my son-in-law, he's from a tribe in Louisiana, but that doesn't mean they don't have a historic context, a cultural context. I have treaties, some tribes may not. The Navajo are Dene, which I didn't know, but I'm comfortable with my sense of place being in the north along the shores of Lake Superior. Of course, when I say I'm Ojibwe, there's 155 communities, 255,000, and the most recent census has now, we're up to 6,900,000. I mean, we're close to 7 million, but who we interact with. But I really believe a student who is Indigenous and has more of a responsibility to have that as part of their experience. Non-Native people can understand it, but I don't know if they can participate in finding that they're going to accept the colonist exploitation, because I don't want anyone to, as the decolonization model in acknowledgement, I don't want anyone to name me, to claim me, or to tame me. And one has to be very careful about this in a teaching context, though, because you notice how I kind of sort of subtly said, next time we talk, you'll have the 7 books. No, I just prefer just one little paragraph. If you look in Google, you'll find out in your history, though, did you have much? I'm just asking you because this is a dialogue as acknowledgement. Did you have much exposure to Avine Deloria as an author?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so to share with you, he would be in our world the native philosopher, the native religious person, the theology, and North. I'm just using that as an example. It could be, but I'm out of the 60s, so I'm 76. But I just have to be pretty aware of the new platforms too. So to me, it's a dialogue between an elder and between you. A year from now, if I see you, I'll be 77. You'll have this down like you wouldn't believe. uh, is that's not a challenge. That's like a responsibility to our indigenous paradigm, correct?
Correct.
So you're all excited. No.
No, I am excited. It is a very courageous thing that people can do to understand who they come from, where they come from. Because personally, that was a huge journey for me just to accept my heritage because I grew up with a lot of shame in my culture. I didn't want to be Native oftentimes. And in the same way, I could see how everyone had, like, all cultures have some form of shame in their past, in their history. And it's difficult to accept that. But it's good and necessary.
And if we don't celebrate our experience, and I've been blessed in many ways in my own discernment, I could isolate the negativity and the shame in the culture, but for some reason, I've been blessed to understand by using my academic experience, my cultural experience, and being positive. So you notice how I subtly shared with you the excitement of learning, not the excitement of a demand.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying, that's the way we learn. And I didn't, and I, and it's a matter of context, but acknowledgement has to be excitement to the individual, like we call it in the Christian world, our rule of life, our daily prayer, the safe environment, we want to nurture, we do not want to oppress. Because once we do that, we're not forming a good tribal community. But that's not to say people like me that have been in court, I mean, I'm well aware of all the difficulties that Native people have. But if we don't hold on to something that's going to hold us in a consistent model, and for me, my experience has been one of education, which is a liberating experience and in the newness. But the elder scholar residence model means, I mean, the elder means you take an interest in a variety of experiences. Now, for me, I'm comfortable in the woods and the lake, but if I was in Arizona, New Mexico, I could tolerate it. But if in the South Dakota, North Dakota, around, but where I immensely enjoyed is the relationship of other tribal people and other tribal systems where we can interact without judgment and experience our journey. Because the minute we attach a word to it, like shame and negative and those kinds of things, we're not taking ownership of our own personal lives and how we move forth. Because to me, I tend to be more tolerant, I tend to be more accepting, but I didn't realize that as I'm talking to you, I'm like fourth or fifth generation, maybe 7 or 8 generations, not in the academy, in the where of knowledge that I'm sitting here today. A lot of Native people, my ancestors, have helped me to be who I am. Now, I've been blessed not to be overly colonized. The non-Native person in my family system went back to Denmark. So I don't have any problems with Europeans returning. But what I mean, no, I'm just saying that humorously. But the key here is it's how you accept your own life journey. And the acknowledgement of that, and I know I'm taking a little different twist on this, the acknowledgement is, I repeat, how you accept your own indigenous journey. The acknowledgement is how you parallel that to the Judeo-Christian, or the the Jewish, Hebrew, whatever you want to call it, that, and how you interact in a society that you just bring that gift to the table. You bring that gift to the community. If you don't bring that gift, then you've kind of like not really, in my view, you're not a holistic person. If you're an indigenous person, you don't study a little bit about your own background. I mean, it's awkward. Not to say the good, bad, and ugly are the good, but they use the 60s model. You tend to be aware of yourself in that construct. And you notice how I was very careful saying, I'm doing this abstractly without ceremony and without language. If someone says to me, do I know my Ojibwe language? I don't speak it, but I know it. Because I've grown up in a family, my parents says, you're going to learn English. And there was no shame. I mean, I was the functionality, because I understand the culture. I understand the community. It's no different than I don't need to learn Hebrew or Greek to understand the colonists, like the Romans, if you want to call them colonists. I mean, it's the context of how you view yourself in this world. And to me, an indigenous paradigm just enhances your future, enhances me. It's just another gift we have, if that helps.
Yeah, that does. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I do want to be more joyful and excited in learning about my culture. I don't want to attach shame, or I don't want to be stuck, or like I want to be aware that we're where I am now. I have experienced joy, and where I am now is moving forward as well from that.
Yeah, and let me put it in this context, because there's only 7 million of us. We're 2.2% of the 360 million people in this country, United States. We are very much connected. Now, at the University of New Mexico, a friend of mine named Dr. Ted Johola, he may have left the campus, but he used to say, as much as you try to change the native experience, the imprint is part of them in their land, in their sense of place. And being in New Mexico, they're there because of those settings. Someone like me, my sense of place is Lake Superior, the forest, wild rice, hunting and fishing. That doesn't make it good or bad. It's just that that's what I come out of. And the connection to my sense of place and the Christianity that came to me first wasn't an oppressive Christianity. It was a Christianity of hope, a Christianity of building community. I always tease, we had the Protestants first, the Congregationalists, and then they left. So then the Roman Catholics purchased the franchise, and then they kind of left. So that I have been an active Episcopalian, but it's not the denominational. It's how you interpret those journeys. Some have been really difficult in First Nations in Canada with the residential schools, but it's how we manage. It's sort of like risk management, how you manage and mitigate those experiences. If you don't mitigate it or navigate it, it can really hurt your worldview personally and collectively. Then you're always on a defensive posture, you're not in an affirming posture. And the beauty of our religious experience, whether it be tribal Christianity or any, is to be positive, but yet to be realistic about our understanding, and to be understanding, because in the end, by faith, we accept these experiences, but we need to be, and that the native, indigenous, tribal person has to acknowledge that experience. Now, as an elder, you notice how I got excited about the native authors, but that's not to say there are so many new ones out there, so many new people presenting things, but I'm not presenting solutions. I'm not presenting strategies. What I'm presenting is for the individual to find those themselves and to share them in a collective context, which is difficult because everybody wants answers. And I chuckle anyone who's an engineering student, if it's civil, mechanical, there's always a plan. But if you don't describe that plan, then you're not going to feel a sense of ownership of your own worldview. You don't want to deny it. You don't want to deny your indigenous experience. I would hope not. I can't deny it. It's my worldview. When I'm in the Southwest, I can tolerate it, but I prefer. To me, it's not. I have so many friends in those. I prefer to be in the North, but I call it. It's how we embrace ourselves and acknowledge our cultural, religious, spiritual identity. And in the context of the universe, that's what we're part of. And I don't want to get too far out there. Sometimes I think the indigenous matter to us when they talk about science and physics and dark matter. Why don't they, it's matter, whether it's dark. We have matter. We matter, to use that in the very metaphysical context. And I think what helps us is our sense of place, even though we have migrated, we move around if you think of Americas. But the real difficulty, though, is the colonists and the colonization as sort of the tools we have for resiliency. I've often said the tools are limited, but both the non-native can benefit from resiliency of not buying into systems that are after a while become hollow. That's the protection of the environment, the protection of of us as human beings, on and on and on. But acknowledgement has to be understood in the context, if you're native, indigenous, with that model. If it's not understood, then you kind of spend your entire life, I don't like to use the word assimilated, but you become less of a whole person. And that's the holistic model is sort of more important than I'm not given, everyone has to define that for themselves. If somebody wants to learn a language, they're good at linguistics, learn it. If somebody knows it, then amplify it. But it's the matter of acknowledging your indigenous journeys.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay, I'm trying to braid our summary for our 8 minutes, but I don't know where we're at here.
No, I think it makes sense. Yeah, first acknowledge or like really dive into who you are, where you come from, and then after that, let that flow into your relationships with the people that you're meeting, like the places you're going, and acknowledge also that they are coming with their own history, their own culture, their own character.
But to further define that, though, is we have an obligation because we're the ownership of the different tribes. We're here, so whether they be European, Afro-American, Asian, whatever world cultures they're part of, this is our sense of place. This Americas, if you want to call it that. And I believe we sometimes do an adjustment to ourselves, but not just accepting that reality. And I believe the system of trying to change, that's where residential schools, when I said some of us didn't go, my ancestors didn't go for the annuities. Maybe they did. And the second one is having an understanding of your place in the history of the dynamics of this kind of helps. That, in other words, if you don't know where you're coming from, it's pretty hard to know where you're going, I guess, to put it in the context of that. And I'm really careful here because if you accept your own indigenous, then you accept perhaps whether it be Christianity, Zen, Buddhist, Islam. I'm using any world kind of religions. And I personally believe you can't really accept that until you understand your sense of place. I often was telling someone once a quick little humorous story when I was a little kid. Someone said, "Oh, Joseph and Mary were going back to the tribes, going back and, the Christmas story." I said, "Oh, it's enrollment time." I mean, I put it even when I was 10 and 11 years old, I understood government and membership. So my context, I had to put it as a child, was not the journey on the donkey. It was they're going back to the tribe for enrollment certification. I mean, because I'm legalistically trained as a little kid. I'm a child. I kind of enjoyed that. But someone else could say it, could find it differently. That doesn't make it good, bad, or indifferent. It means I applied it to my worldview. Mm. And when I harvest wild rice, it takes two people, one to hold the boat, one to knock the rice in. So when two or three gather, I need another person to do the work. That's community. So these simplistic are very, very much in depth. Now, coming from a hunting, fishing, and gathering society doesn't mean that I'm not agricultural, but it means that I have had enough food from the hunting and fishing and gathering. I mean, these kinds of dynamics, but if you're asking the indigenous person to cut out their tradition, you're not asking, it's not a healthy way to start to become a Christian. A healthy way to be a Christian is to know who you are from an indigenous point of view. But also not to be trapped in this colonization, internalization, and all these kinds of things. If you become trapped and you deny your own ceremony, you deny your own language. And that's not to say that the beauty of our cultures depends upon how we view it, not how it's been destroyed or taken away from us. And today, with the technologies and with the experiences, the acknowledgement and the plans, people can find many ways of acknowledging and celebrating their cultures. But the difficulty, though, in the last summary is my bishop, who's a Seminole from Oklahoma, retired. He says, if you're ignorant of being ignorant, you're still ignorant. Both sides need to know that. Now, you notice how careful I was at age 76, coming out of the 60s. The person who was the greatest influence on my life intellectually was Vine Deloria, because Vine Deloria said, I've heard of enough times, 4-hour lectures or 2-hour lectures, and that we need researchers, we need historians, we need investigate. We need many kinds of occupations in a Native experience. And I'm thankful in 2021, I've lived to see his view of life come about, that we have so many talented, so many educated Native people across the country that they're all making meaningful contributions. That's not to say there isn't because in the court, I've dealt with child custody cases, I've dealt with so many difficulties. It's how we manage and navigate that. So as an elder, I'm just enthusiastically that next time I see you, we talk, well, Vine Deloria, yeah. But that's not to say that I should not know the contemporary dynamic. One of my cousins, my cousin's son, is a movie producer. I mean, he went to the Sundance Film Festival, and he did a movie called Wild Indians. His name is Lyle Corbett, plug. But he's just a diligent Native Ojibwe who just kept at it, wrote the story, got it done. Now it's a movie. So there are diligent Indigenous people doing things. That's a plug for his movie, by the way. It's called Wild Indians. It's in theaters. But there are many stories like that. Now, that comes out of my own family. Every family can have those kinds of experiences, but they also can have the other experiences, tragedy, addiction, It's putting it into balance. If you don't put it into balance, you don't forgive yourself, you don't move forward. And I believe that's the journey that we have to explore in 2021. But if we don't explore that, and then we're going to let the institutions in the academy and the society determine our work, and that's not healthy for you or for I.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard. Would you pray a blessing over the people watching on their journey?
Yes, I would. And I'd like to offer a prayer for individuals, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, who are trying to come to grips with their own journey, for them to acknowledge their experience, whether there be history of coming from Europe, coming from any place in the world. Let's find ways for us to be in community, but let's not deny the worth of every Indigenous culture in the world. We all come from a sense of place, and let's find hope in our Creator, in the universe, in our God, in our Christ, in our Spirit, and let's find ways for us to be together. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you.